Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Weedy Virtual Spotlight, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama's path to CMS-0057 prior authorization compliance with Itiliti Health. This spotlight is sponsored by Itiliti Health. It's my pleasure to introduce the CEO and founder of Itiliti Health, Michael Lunzer.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Really excited to be joined by Tracy Welsh from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And today we're going to talk about their path to CMS 0057 compliance. And of course, Itiliti Health was a big part of that. I'm Michael Lunzer. I'm the CEO and founder of Itiliti Health. And I'd like to introduce Tracy. Would you mind, Tracy, just telling the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Welsh. I'm a department manager here at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama in the health and clinical engagement area. I've been with Blue Cross for over 20 years, and my area handles things like prior authorization, appeals, and clinical audits. I'm real excited to be able to share with you some innovative things that we've been working on with Itiliti Health to help with improved prior authorization processes and to help with interoperability.
Thank you, Tracy. So just a very quick glance at the agenda for today. We'll talk just very briefly about the 0057 and its structure and intent, and then we'll dive deep into Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama's approach to preparing for CMS 0057 and getting live with the interfaces in today's environment. We'll end with questions at the end of the call. Feel free to send your questions in the chat. And we do have a few folks watching those questions as well. And those individuals can also jump in and help answer some of your questions. But we'll of course address questions at the end of the session. So just very briefly, 0057 is a regulation finalized by CMS in January of 2024. The intent is really to help replace all of the manual prior authorization processes with an end-to-end transactional capability. When you think about one of the big challenges in this world, it's the fact that payers and providers don't have a good common method of communication. And that's why we've ended up defaulting to the fax machine. So this new 0057 architecture creates a common way for payers and providers to communicate around prior authorizations and rules. The essence of that standard is that communications will happen over a FHIR transaction method, and there are three transactions within those FHIR transactions. The coverage requirements discovery, or is an authorization required transaction, the documents, templates, and rules transaction, which is intended to tell the provider what do you need to submit and what answers do you need to provide, and then the prior auth support or pass transaction, which is intended to allow the provider to submit prior authorizations electronically and get an answer back through that same channel of communication. The most important part about complying with these new structures is that payers need to be able to have a source of truth or some method, some system that can answer the question, does this require a prior authorization? And then once that question has been answered and the provider says, yes, I want to submit a prior authorization, the payer needs a method to send the questionnaire, if you will. In this case, questionnaire is broadly defined as a method for the provider to answer questions or submit documents or information that help the payer to make a decision. And then, of course, the payer needs some source of receiving that information and making decisions. Couple of exciting things about this CMS requirement is that in January of 2024, CMS said that payers had to have these application programming interfaces up and running by the end of 2026. Well, just in the last few months, the administration passed something called HTI 4, which is a final rule that describes In essence, the most important part for this conversation is that the certification of a EHR is conditioned based upon that EHR supporting these three transactions: the coverage requirements discovery, documents, templates, and rules, and prior authorization support. So this will really drive the providers to adopt this new architecture. And so essentially what we find ourselves with is a really great structure that says payers need to support these application programming interfaces to answer these questions and interact in this way by the end of 2026. And providers need to have systems that can interact with these same transactions within 2027 in order to get MIPS credits. So we now have the industry aligned on a requirement and a method. And that's really exciting because we've been waiting for that since the dawning of the fax machine. And so now we can move from a flat image document into really well-structured documents and information in a truly interactive approach. This is just a quick diagram of what the ultimate architecture looks like. It involves the provider having a EHR that supports these connection methods or these transactions, or the provider's EMR can be combined with a Smart on Fire application that can perform these transactions. Those devices talk through this new Fire interface, through a network connection of some kind, through another Fire interface on the payer side of the world, and ultimately land on the service, the capability to answer that CRD, or is authorization required transaction. And when that's answered, then of course the documents, templates, and rules transaction jumps in and helps answer or send over that questionnaire to the provider that they need to fill out. And when they fill out that questionnaire or attach documents, etc., they're submitted back through the PAS transaction. In the event there's a third-party delegated vendor or policy system, those systems can sit behind other companies' DTR and CRD servers to proxy these transactions, so essentially routing them to the right destination. Ultimately, all of these transactions need to make their way into the existing utilization management system of the health plan. So that's the very brief overview of the CMS 0057 requirements and the approach that most organizations are going to be taking between now and the end of 2026. So with that, I'd like to transition over to Tracy and let her talk a little bit about Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama's approach as they looked at this particular challenge. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Michael. Well, one of the things I wanted to start off with is how did we approach this challenge ahead of us? And we wanted to look internally to see, understand what we were up against and to make sure that we were setting ourselves up for success when it comes to interoperability. So the first thing that we looked at were the compliance deadlines, and there were several different deadlines in the ruling, but the first one that we focused in on was the 1/1/26 requirement of having the prior auth responses turned around faster. And so even though some of the API requirements are 2027, we knew that we needed to go ahead and implement some changes to be able to turn around our responses faster. So we knew, even though it felt like we had a lot of time, there was significant work to be done, and we wanted to dive into that as quickly as possible. The next thing that we did was we evaluated our systems to see what type of limitations that we had and what we needed to do to, again, to make ourselves successful. And, are we able to answer the question, is auth required? Is our policy management system set up in a way to support these requirements? And do we have the questionnaire functionality in a scalable way to be able to support these changes? One of the things that we knew was we had operational challenges where we had some manual processes that we were going to have to work on and limited interoperability. So we knew there was a need for modernization, and we wanted to have, a single source of truth data system to be able to support this new rule. The next thing that we began to do was to align our internal goals with these requirements. So we focused in on educating all of our teams across our company to understand what the requirements are and, why this is important. And we also began to focus in on selecting a vendor that could help us implement this new functionality that we were going to need to be able to support these requirements. So we also knew that it was important not only to have IT at the table, but to also have different business areas, our clinical team at the table to be able to collaborate and to bring information from their perspectives to make sure that when we picked a vendor, that was a vendor that could support all the needs from all perspectives. This has taken a lot of complex coordination and collaboration across multiple departments in our company. And we have continued to, encourage our teams to focus on transparency, creating efficiencies, and setting this up in a scalable way so that we can expand for future capabilities.
So now we'll move on from kind of the initial thoughts to actually some of the specific challenges that were identified and needed to be implemented. And so that we'll shift over to talking a little bit about some of the decisions Alabama made and the go forward. Tracy?
Okay. So we, of course, partnered with Itiliti Health to come up with a project plan. And the first thing that we decided was that we wanted to focus in on our policy management system and the questionnaires. So we needed to replace our system that we had in place with something that would be able to handle what we needed to do for interoperability. So first things first was digitizing our medical policies, getting them set up in a way to create question sets, because we knew that was the foundation of everything else that we were going to be working on. We also have been focused on consolidating our prior authorization rules and, consolidating that into one place, into PH8 point. The other things that we're focused on are the CMS API, so deploying those within our provider portal, and then having those APIs available when providers are ready to connect with that.
Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
So wanted to just briefly talk about what we typically see in the marketplace in terms of the way organizations manage their policies. And then Tracy can talk a little bit about what Alabama, Blue Cross Blue Shield Alabama had in place as their pre-stage. So what we oftentimes see is health plans have a policy team that works on policies, creates those initial policies in Microsoft Word. And of course, they send those policies around to various approvers, get red lines, get edits. Once those are finally approved, they're then typically saved as a PDF document or an HTML document and sent over to the company's website team. And this is where we end up with a lot of challenges. First of all, how do we store those different versions of a policy when they're being created? How do we keep track of different versions that have been used historically? How do we make those available for the clinical team as well as providers if they need to look back in time and know what rules they were supposed to have been following? And then how are those different documents deployed on the public website? Oftentimes they're deployed in a document store storage system, which doesn't have a lot of metadata around those. So the only way you can find a policy is to do a general search for terms or information. And oftentimes you get multiple policies back that match those terms. So it makes it hard to find the right version. So that's kind of some of the challenges that we typically see. Tracy, can you speak a little bit about Blue Cross Alabama's world before go live?
Sure. Sure, yes. And the challenges that you typically see are the same challenges that we had. Having the policy creation process go from Word to, passing that Word document back and forth and then publishing a PDF. And when changes needed to be made, going back to Word, of course, was not efficient. The approvals were cumbersome. being able to audit the history of policies, all those things were a lot more manual and time consuming than, once we moved into the digital format.
And so the end goal with Itility's policy management tool is to get to a system that allows for the digitization and the management of policies. Whoops, sorry about that. The digitization and the management of policies in one entity that allows the policy creation and policy management team to interact with one system and have that system then be able to be the source of truth for human readable policies as well as for FHIR questionnaires. And that's one of the critical outcomes of the Itiliti Health policy management application. Within that structure, ultimately, the components that those questionnaires or policy documents are used in is when that provider decides that they want to submit a prior auth, having the ability for the payer system to send that questionnaire over to the provider, have that provider's EHR read that questionnaire, display it on the screen for the user, and make it easy for them to see those questions, hopefully have some of those questions pre-answered based upon the way the EMR can be set up. And then also to be able to complete that questionnaire and ultimately know while they're working on that submission, whether or not their prior authorization is going to be completed. Approved, excuse me. So ultimately, this is kind of the vision. When a questionnaire is complete, the provider should get an indication based on their answers. The patient is going to be pre-certified for the following procedures. So this makes it really easy for the provider to quickly know, have I met all the requirements in advance? Are there things I need to go back through and perform? And that's the idea behind 0057 and the questionnaire functionality, is that it's intended to make it really easy for the provider to submit a prior auth and for these rules to be automated in such a way that a vast majority of prior auths can be automated through this mechanism.
Okay. Next, after, we got our policies digitized, our next focus was migrating our legacy systems and prior auth list into PA Checkpoint. So again, we wanted a single source of truth for all PAs, and a content management system, which PA Checkpoint is able to do that. And an easy way for providers to figure out if authorization is required, and to make sure that we're pushing forward the correct rules with the correct effective dates. And then, a system that will support integration within our website, within the portal, and for CRD. One of the things that we realized early on is, this was a tremendous rollout. Not only digitizing our medical policies and creating the question set, but also making sure that our benefits are, that we're pushing for the correct benefit coverage and the prior auth requirements. So we decided to have an incremental rollout. We started with our provider portal, focusing on deploying the CMS APIs within the provider portal, having a single source of truth there, and then phasing in the benefits into that workflow. So we are leveraging the existing portal for the benefit rules initially, and then phasing in the benefit into the API. So this has helped us to kind of slow down and to be able to make sure that we're getting it right, and that we're implementing the rules as we move forward in a more controlled fashion.
And there's another element that kind of goes into the need to focus on more of a incremental rollout, and that's really the challenge that we all have had, finding providers that were willing and ready to implement these new prior authorization standards. Because the EHRs are a little bit behind some of the vendor products on the payer side. And so when you look at this diagram, it shows an EMR on the left side of this diagram talking to those interfaces of the payer on the right side. So we were faced with the challenge of how do we go live with CRD DTR Pass, but not have the full capability on the far left-hand side of this equation. And what we did, again, based upon Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama's direction, was we integrated a Smart on Fire application into the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama portal. So essentially, the portal has a module within it that looks very similar to the things that an EHR needs to build and support. So with that in mind, what we have is a scenario where the provider logs in to the provider access application from Alabama. Once they've performed a couple of tasks in there, selecting their patient and doing some things that were already inherent within that portal, the user submits a prior authorization desired procedure code, and then that Smart on Fire application uses the CRD transaction to come back and ask Itiliti Health, does it require a prior authorization? And if it does require a prior authorization, we reply back with the questionnaire from the DTR transaction. And when the provider fills out that questionnaire and submits it, it comes back through the Itiliti Health Pass application with auto authorization rules. And then can be inserted into the utilization management system with the appropriate status. The exciting thing about this is this has been live since the end of September this year, and it allows Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama to continue to improve and augment and test out all of the CRD DTR pass capabilities and make sure they're working at scale for their providers. And then as providers have access to EMR that support these transactions and a network capability that can get from the provider to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, the task ahead is strictly working on the connectivity between the Fire server at Blue Cross Blue Shield Alabama and the provider. So we've isolated the requirements down to something that can be accomplished easily, and that allows us to really move forward with this technology without having to wait until a much later date where we might not be able to respond quickly to other issues. So that's a little bit about what we've accomplished. Now we're going to dive into some of the results and impacts of this solution for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And a little later on, we'll go into much more detail about the actual solution and some screenshots and let you see it in action. But for now, we're going to start with Tracy telling us a little bit about some of the advantages and the goals they saw with this project. Tracy?
Okay. So the advantages of early implementation, of course, is that no deployment is easy. And this was and is a complicated implementation. And so we knew we wanted to start early to give ourselves time to get it right. And so, of course, every phase that we've gone through, we've done a lot of testing and different iterations, and things come up that we realize, hey, we need to know this. So I'm glad that we started early like we did, and we've taken the time to make sure that we're not rushing through things, so that we have a product that is simple, straightforward, easy to use, and that will bring value to providers, patients, and to our internal teams. We're already reaping the benefits of the efficiencies that we've gained, and we've been able to refocus staff to other areas of need. Expanding PA automation, of course, results in faster responses to providers and for patients who are waiting to know if their prior auth has been approved. And it's also helped us improve transparency on coverage requirements.
Great. Thank you, Tracy.
Mhm.
So next up, I'd like to talk a little bit about the actual process of implementing some of these tools. So first up, we'll talk a little bit about the policy management portion of the project. So essentially, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama had over 600 policies, typically formatted in Word and some in PDF. We needed a way to ingest those policies into the policy management product in a way that would then kind of deconstruct those policies. What we find is a policy has multiple different sections, and each section has data that would most appropriately be stored in slightly different formats. For instance, some of the data in a policy is best stored as just text because it doesn't have any extended value beyond its human readable meaning. Other data like procedure codes and the metadata about a policy, its effective date, its name, and other associations, those elements need to be stored as a database. And then the criteria, which is essentially the rules that say a procedure will be approved if the patient meets this requirement plus these other two requirements, that data needs to be stored in a different format because that's going to form the foundation of the criteria, of the questionnaire. And so the process that we went through was we start by looking at all of the policies and identifying any variations and looking for some consistencies. For instance, typically there's a consistent title name with a certain font size for each different section. And then we build out an ingestion utility that takes all of those policies and pulls them in and breaks them out into the various components. And then there's a user acceptance testing process, which is essentially a process of the users from the policy team of Blue Cross Blue Shield Alabama looking at the flat file of the policy that was in place in the before picture, and then looking at the dynamically created, reassembled version of the policy that's in Itiliti Health and verifying that they look identical. And that means that essentially Itiliti Health has these policies broken up into multiple different elements, and then we're dynamically assembling those so that there's a human readable version that looks identical. And then we can take the criteria within those policies and put those into a questionnaire format. So
Yeah.
go ahead, Tracy.
Sorry. Yeah, so post policy trans ingestion, we are able to search and navigate by multiple different variables. We can look up a policy by the policy number, keyword, code, date, even draft or final status and line of business. We also have clear navigation and routing for delegated vendors.
Yeah, and that's a big benefit. Again, on the human readable side of the policy experience for a provider, they need to be able to find policies that the health plan has, and they also need a method to find policies of delegated vendors or third-party policy providers. And those need to be integrated clearly into the search and navigation of policies for the provider user. What we typically see is the health plan has a website page that says literally in words, if you're looking for the policy for this category, click on this button and go to this other vendor system. And that information again is on a web page. So it means that the provider has to really read a lot of information to know where to go. So by integrating those third-party vendors, those delegated vendors and policy vendors into a single system for navigation, it makes a big difference for the provider to be able to easily find those rules and details. Tracy, other things you would talk about regarding the policy management capability?
Yes. So the other benefits from the this tool is that we're able to track and have version control on these medical policies. So the system tracks policies by line of business. It ensures that all policies are accounted for and up to date. We can track draft and final versions of the policy with their effective dates, and we're able to distinguish between active and archive policies. And this, because of the way everything is digitized and broken down into sections and we have dates of when things go effective and end dates, things like that, we can report on that and we can audit much more easily the history of the medical policy.
So at this point, I'm going to dive into some actual screenshots, and I'm going to go relatively fast because we want to cover the meat of the topic here. But I think sometimes it's helpful for people to see the screens. And so essentially, this is the first screen, and it's where the provider has logged into the application and is able to tell the system what patient they're working with, what facility, and then also enter a procedure code that is going to be searched to determine if it requires prior authorization. Once we get from that page, we navigate over to the Itiliti Health section of the portal, where we identify the service details for this patient. It allows the provider to enter a diagnosis code, additional diagnosis codes, essentially anything that the payer wants additional to be used in the determination of which questionnaire or other benefit-related considerations. Once we hit this screen and continue from this screen, we're actually submitting the CRD to Itiliti Health. And again, if there is a questionnaire that applies, Itiliti Health replies back with the questionnaire. And you'll notice here that we have more than one procedure code on the left-hand side of this. And in some cases, a procedure code may have more than one policy that applies. So in this screen, we allow the provider to get a little more granular and tell us which particular procedure based upon those policies. They can actually click on the policy name and go see the policy to determine for sure if that's the policy they want to submit the questionnaire for. And then when they decide they're ready, they can click on the complete questionnaire, the radio button on the left side, sorry, and then the complete questionnaire. And when they get that complete questionnaire screen, they're actually able to answer the questions in the DTR questionnaire. So at this point, they're filling out the answers to those questions. And again, if they answer questions in a way that fulfills the requirements, they're told on the bottom of this screen that based on your answers, the patient is pre-certified for the following procedures. Of course, they need to continue to complete the prior authorization. Once they get to the next screen, they can either submit the questionnaire here, or if you notice on the bottom, there's a note attaching documentation and notes. The questionnaire can have specific prompting that says, please attach a particular document or notes. And this capability now on the bottom of this, the additional documentation and notes section, allows the provider to say, you know what, I also want to submit some additional information. Once they complete that and submit, their prior authorization submission is complete. So those are the screens that I'm going to show you today about what happens inside the provider portal for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And I will mention that the experience of the questionnaire, so these two questionnaire slides, this is actually what the questionnaire looks like in an EHR as well. So there's no difference between the portal view of a questionnaire and the EHR version of a questionnaire. They essentially look identical. They both use the FHIR questionnaire code that comes out of the Itiliti Health Policy Management application. And as we've talked about, that policy management application allows Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama to also expose the same policies in a human readable form in their public website. So if you go to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama's public website and you navigate to the medical policies section, you get a screen that looks like this that allows you to navigate around and drill down on which specific policy you want to get to with a procedure code, looking at third-party delegated programs. All of those things are available here. Once you've found the policy that you want to view and you click on the version number, it brings up that version, that actual medical policy in a human readable form. Again, the metadata on the top and all of the various elements of the policy are dynamically assembled to make it look like it's one document. In reality, behind the scenes in the Itiliti Health application, that policy is broken out into multiple segments. Each of these segments are stored in a way that's relative to its segment. So for instance, required documents is a section where the user can indicate that for this policy, we always want to see these three particular documents. All of the references, history, everything is here, but in its own discrete form. And I think, Tracy, you wanted to mention something that your team found really valuable about this approach.
Yes, our medical policy team, they love this platform. And, as you can see, you have the different tabs that are associated with the medical policy. And when they make updates to the medical policy, now that our policies have been digitized and loaded into the platform, when they need to make updates, they can go to the specific tab that they're editing. Like if they want to add a new reference to a medical policy, they just click on the references tab, they add that information, and the system updates the document that he was showing earlier that looks like a PDF more or less, with the information. So it helps us to avoid someone accidentally making an edit by entering something and shifting the policy information down on a Word document. It simplifies the process, and it also, helps our team to be able to go into the specific area that needs to be edited and make that change and then move on to the next thing. So it's been a huge improvement to our processes as far as, keeping our medical policies up to date and making sure that the correct lines of business are assigned to the medical policy. All those things this platform has helped us with.
And one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is how the criteria tab gets turned into a questionnaire. So if I clicked on the criteria tab, it brings up the policy questionnaire authoring tool from Itiliti Health. And what you see here is on the left-hand side is the human readable information from the policy. So this is the exact text that was in the Word document from Alabama before we ingested it. And then Itiliti Health, I can't show you all the details here, but there's a few clicks to basically have the algorithm and Itiliti Health automatically take this human readable text and turn it into a FHIR questionnaire. So behind this right-hand side is actual FHIR JSON coding, and that code is then read by an EMR viewing tool inside the Itiliti Health application, and it shows you what that questionnaire would look like exactly within the EMR. And if I wanted to change something over here on the left-hand side, I can tell it to generate the smart questionnaire over, and it will adjust the language on the right in an automated fashion. It's literally a real-time questionnaire authoring tool. And this is something that is really powerful and makes the project for those policy teams. They are now able to really author these FHIR questionnaires that without this tool might require developers or coders. In this case, this is a no-code experience for a user. And again, all of these elements are married alongside the human readable version through this tabbed experience. So again, ultimately, what we've delivered now is in place today and running since the end of September is the Blue Cross Blue Shield Alabama portal, talking to the various interfaces behind the scenes. So there's still some work to be done within this project. We need to expand on some of the benefit rules that were maintained in the provider portal of Alabama. So again, that's one of the things that we have as an additional item to be finalized in the coming weeks is adding some of the additional benefit rules to the Itiliti Health application. The detailed questionnaire that I showed you a minute ago, those are able to be done on an incremental basis. So Alabama has the ability to say that they're going to use a more simplified questionnaire for some of their policies, and they want to use a very detailed questionnaire for certain policies. And this tool allows you that flexibility. Another element that needs to be completed yet is connecting the delegated vendors using the DTR pass capabilities. And then connecting providers directly through their EMR and then through the actual FHIR network. So there's a little bit of work left to be done, but again, this approach to starting with the portal allowed Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama to start, test all of the CRD DTR capabilities, and then be ready for those next phases. So next up, I'd like to ask Tracy to share a little bit about some of the outcomes and the measurable results. Tracy?
Sure. Yes, yes, we're already seeing improved efficiencies. We are able to have centralized updates to our medical policies and enhanced version control. We've streamlined our approval process and being able to integrate the questionnaires, having the questionnaires and the medical policy and PA checkpoint, all of that in one system just helps with the automation and simplifying the process. As I mentioned before, we have the advanced searching and reporting now because of the tool. And, when we can push forward the requirements, providers are fully informed and prompted for the information that they need. As he was showing you in the image before, if a provider goes through their questionnaire and they see the requirements from our medical policy, we've also given them the option to withdraw that request if they see that the patient needs, conservative therapy and they haven't gone through that yet. What we want is for the provider to realize what's needed and then, not submit the request until they've finished the things that are required. So we're already, excited about the transparency there and making sure that the guidelines are clear so providers know what they need to do. And then, of course, the real-time approval. So people aren't waiting on an answer. They can get an answer and move on with the procedure that they're planning. The last thing I wanted to just share, I think, is you can go ahead and move to the next screen. These are comments from our frontline users who are working in the system, and I thought this was really powerful coming from the people who are using it. Just to kind of scan through these, they talk a little bit about integrating the workflows among our different teams will produce better experience for members. The formatting and standardization is so much better. It keeps things standardized across all policies. It's quick and easy. They're spending less time. Efficiency and simplification, they're seeing that it's cutting down on their administrative burden. The process is simplified. And I want to hone in on the word simplified. As we've worked through implementing these changes to our systems, this implementation and the changes that going forward could be really complicated. And so that's one thing that we've stressed all along the way is as we're working through problems and figuring out ways to handle things, keep it simple. We want to keep things simple and intuitive. And I think Itiliti has done a great job in helping us with that. Because what we want at the end of the day is a tool that's easy for people to use and that's easy to understand. So I feel like we've accomplished that and we'll continue to accomplish that going forward. And then we have a few more comments here. Another comment that our team really likes is that the codes are stored in the Itiliti system, so they don't have to manually create a separate table. And it's easy to add new codes because they're automatically loaded in Itiliti. So the codes are attached to the medical policy that they apply to, and that process is simplified. QA is more straightforward for the team, and then being able to access different versions of the policies and then scheduling publications in advance helps reduce the risk of them missing a deadline. So a lot of good feedback from our teams who are in the system. And, we are all working so that we set up this process to be able to scale far beyond what we're doing today.
Thank you, Tracy. a couple other things that are lessons learned that I think we can talk about this together, Tracy. But
Mhm.
specifically, I think some of the challenges that we found were just that, the policies. One of the challenges for a policy team is always maintaining a standard design template. And that was one of the challenges that when we went into ingest policies, sometimes they weren't in the standard policy template. During this process, it really helped us to ensure that that standard was in place for all policies. Um,
That's
prior
right.
prior auth rules were often in multiple systems, and that made it hard for people to get to them. And so during the implementation, of course, we have to go find all of those rules. And sometimes those rules in other systems are not detailed enough. So there's a little bit of work needed to be done in that area. Similarly, some of the benefit coverage rules are especially hard to identify. There's a 270 transaction that can be used to an EDI transaction that can be used to get benefit information, but it's usually not thorough enough. And then another challenge is managing and dealing with accumulators. Benefits rules and accumulators are probably the more significant challenge in this environment. And those are a little difficult because those claims can tend to lag, and therefore accumulator information, real-time information about achievement and using up accumulators for procedures can sometimes be inaccurate or challenging to provide. Any other comments on lessons learned or things you think would be really helpful for organizations to think about as they pursue this CMS 0057 work, Tracy?
I think you covered it well. I just think, starting early is important, taking your time. I think a lot of the work that we've done is going back and just making sure that the rules are clear and that we're consolidating it all into one place and just, again, trying to keep things simple. Um, I think that, like you said, the medical policies we had a lot of cleanup to do because, like, for example, in the criteria section, we may have extra language in that section. So that had to be removed and put into the category where it belonged, which, at the end of the day, that helps clarify the criteria requirements when someone looks at the policy, but it also helps us to be able to automate those question sets. So a lot of good work here. I think that, the things that we're working on today, it's hard and it's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, it's going to make a difference for the entire healthcare industry. I'm excited. I'm a nurse and, I've worked in the clinical setting. I know that, there are challenges with getting prior auth and, our goal is to help with those challenges, to simplify the process so that providers and patients can get the answer as soon as possible. And, we just keep everything simple for providers, payers, and members across the board.
Yeah, that's a great closing message. I think the this particular category of work gets me very excited because it has the potential to really make a difference for patients and providers. And we're all struggling with this huge challenge of scaling healthcare at a time when there's less resources, and it's really critical that we we solve this problem for people. So with that, I am going to jump through some of the questions here. And first of all, I'll say that yes, the slides will be shared and a recording as well of the presentation. Um, let's see. Oh, there was a question about TEFCA. And first of all, what I guess CRD, DTR, and PASS and TEFCA. So CRD is the coverage requirements transaction. Coverage requirements or is authorization transaction. DTR is the documents, templates, and rules transaction, or essentially questionnaires. Pass is the actual electronic submission of prior authorizations. And then that network component in the middle of the graphic had something called TEFCA in it. And TEFCA is essentially the standards body that has defined a network framework that allows payers and providers to communicate using FHIR. Think of it a lot like the telephone company. And that helps connect payers and providers no matter which back-end data system they use. There's another question here. I think this is a good one for Tracy. Is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama planning to use these APIs for all plans, including commercial, or focused on the marketplace, Medicare Advantage, and government plans?
Yes, I can take that one. Yes, we decided early on that we wanted to use this for all lines of business and not just the required lines of business, because we know that this is going to help across the board. And also, when we implement it across the board for all lines of business, it also helps with provider adoption, because they're able to use it for all of our membership, and it'll speed up the process for all, requests that they submit to our plan.
There's a great question about digitizing policies. The question essentially is, do you have to enter all this information into a system? Is there a big preparatory step that goes into this? And actually, that's one of the things that Itiliti Health does is we take the policies in those 600 PDFs or Word documents, and we develop an automated ingestion. So there's no need for anybody to manually touch those policies until they're ingested into the new system. And then they're able to look at those policies in the new system, the Itiliti Health Policy Management System, and they should look identical when they're regenerated in human readable form to the policy that was used at the beginning. So that's the critical element that makes this really efficient, is being able to get those policies into that digital form without having to do a lot of manual entry or manipulation of data. There's another question here. Does your system identify whether a requested prior auth is inpatient or outpatient? Um, and how does that work? So during the submission of the CRD, there is a request from the provider. The provider needs to identify, is this an inpatient or an outpatient procedure? And that is one of the key things that helps us, along with some other basic data, helps us ensure that we're answering the question as well.
Michael,
Uh,
there's another great one a little bit further down. I think I've gotten to everybody's question. Thank you for
yeah,
your answer, Tracy. That was
great.
that was the one I couldn't answer myself.
Thank you for the voice in the network, by the way. That's Keith Brick, Itiliti Health's interoperability architect, and he's been looking through the questions. So that's great that you're familiar with the questions, Keith. If you want to jump out and
Yeah.
highlight some, that would be great.
Would you be willing to speak to Savita's question? Has provider experience improved as a result? Have you seen fewer denials due to insufficient information? And then I would say also, what about the submissions that aren't necessary?
Great question for Tracy.
Yes, yes. So provider experience has improved, and what we're seeing is that there are providers that are withdrawing their requests rather than submitting. And in the past, when they started down that path, if they are either submitting a fax, or we did have some online portal type of request, but once they got in there, the request had been submitted. So we had to work it. And one of the benefits of this is now that they can see maybe they're not meeting the requirements and they don't want to move forward, that prevents us from having to touch that request that won't be approved. And it takes us away from, other requests that really do need to be approved. So that has definitely been an efficiency on our side. And it also helps the providers to clearly know what they need, and to, so they're not wasting time, dealing with a request that they didn't really want to submit.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tracy.
Mhm.
Chad has a great question about how policies are grouped by line of business and made available to the public. In your experience, is it easier now for providers to access the policies, for example, by visiting your website?
Yes, it is. And so when the provider logs in, we have ways to know which contract that they're looking for, and the system automatically pushes forward the policy that's associated with that line of business. So all of that's coded behind the scenes in Itility's platform. The frontline user, when they're looking for a medical policy, they don't have to think about, I need this specific line of business medical policy. It will automatically push that forward to the provider. So that's automated. And then our internal users, the platform allows our internal users who may be working with different lines of business to be able to see the different versions of a policy for the different lines of business, which makes it easier for them to find what they need and to be aware that there may be different policies depending on the line of business.
I see a couple of questions here that I'd like to address. One is how are you handling proprietary clinical guidelines from companies like MCG or Interqual? And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So those companies, of course, have proprietary policies that are licensed for use, but not for ingestion into other technical systems. And so what Itiliti Health does is we configure in our system the information that knows which policies or which questionnaires effectively and which policies are going to come from MCG or Interqual or any other third-party delegated vendor. And so from there, the Itiliti Health CRD response can tell the user that this particular transaction is going to be reliant on a interqual policy, for example. And then when a prior auth is, when the provider wants the questionnaire, that request for the questionnaire goes to Itiliti Health's policy system, and we submit downstream that request for that questionnaire to MCG or Interqual or the delegated vendor. So we are not configuring those questionnaires in our system. We are acting as a network component that pulls those policies and procedures from those other systems. But again, it's really important that somewhere the payer has a source of truth that knows by procedure and by other categories, where is that policy going to come from, which policy applies. And that is part of the role that Itiliti Health plays in the Alabama ecosystem.
And Josh was asking about the provider portal itself and how I think we call it Compass and the native capabilities that have been built by Tracy's team. Michael or Tracy, do you want to speak more to that? What does the
Yeah.
provider experience in the web?
Yes, so Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, their provider portal is called Provider Access. And the provider user logs into Provider Access, navigates to the fact that they want to request a prior authorization. They typically do that in the context of a patient and maybe a facility. And then when they want to determine if a prior authorization is needed, they enter that CPT code in the provider access application. And when they hit enter, the provider access application automatically launches the Itiliti Health portion of the portal. It's called Provider Compass. And that is the tool that answers, that navigates through the CRD, DTR, pass components. Other questions that jump out, Keith?
Yeah, Kathleen was asking about, have there been any issues with providers stating that there was a discrepancy with an inquiry, procedure ultimately being denied for lack of prior auth, that they say they got a response back by an automated decision? I know the answer here. We provide traceability for each step of the workflow. So a discrete transaction ID identifies when the provider submitted their request, whether they did it over the web or they did it through an API. That information is logged and stored. And so the rules that were applied at that moment in time have that snapshot in our system. So we can provide that full auditability if somebody calls in and says, well, you told me this prior auth wasn't necessary, or you gave me a prior authorization number, and we'll say, yes, that's exactly right. We see that in our system too.
And Tracy, I'd like to ask just, I know we're running out of time here as a final question. Have you seen any other outcomes related to providers' satisfaction or abandonment of the process or any negative ramifications?
We're new into this process, and so far so good. We haven't had any complaints about it. We are reaching out to our network providers to hear about their experience and to get feedback from them because again, we want it to work for them and to be a process that, helps their team move more quickly through the prior auth process. But to this point, we haven't gotten any complaints about it, and we do see that it's improving as far as allowing them to withdraw and to get that automatic approval, and just scaling the number of question sets we have available to the providers for them to get that automatic approval.
That's great. Well, we really appreciate your sharing your experience with us today, Tracy. And for Itiliti Health, we're excited to partner with you and appreciate our relationship. Anyone that would like more information about Itiliti Health, we'd love to have you reach out and answer your questions and assist with your projects and provide live demonstrations of things. With that, I will turn it back over to Michael from Weedy to close out the call. Michael?
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Tracy. Once again, this has been a Weedy Spotlight, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama Path to CMS 0057 prior authorization compliance with Itiliti Health, presented by our friends at Itiliti Health. Please have a great week and happy holidays.
Thank you, everybody.